I wish you could hear Joshua give off a command and see him ride along the battalion on his white horse. He looked so splendidly. He told me last night that he never felt so well in his life. Tom Chamberlain.
What makes it strange is that I should have gained 12 pounds living on worms.
We live so mean here that hard bread is all worms and the meat stinks like hell. And rice 2 or 3 times a week and worms as long as your finger. I liked rice once, but goddamn the stuff now.
It was no uncommon occurrence for a man to find the surface of his pot of coffee swimming with weevils after breaking up hardtack in it. But they were easily skimmed off and left no distinctive flavor behind.
Tell Ma that I think of her beans and collards often and wish for some. But wishing does no good. Benjamin Franklin Jackson.
Union troops were issued beans, bacon, pickled beef, called salt horse by the men, desiccated compressed mixed vegetables, and hardtack, square flour and water biscuits, hard enough, some said, they could stop bullets.
In the Southern Army, you ate something called sloosh. You got issued cornmeal and bacon, and you fried the bacon, which left a great deal of grease in the pan. Then you took the cornmeal and swirled it around in the grease to make the dough. Then you might take the dough and make a snake of it and put it around your ramrod and cook it over the campfire. That was called sloosh. They ate a lot of that.
Coffee was the preferred drink of both armies. Union troops crushed the beans with their rifle butts, drank 4 pints of it a day, strong enough, one man said, to float an iron wedge. And when they could not build a fire, were content to chew the grounds. Southerners made do with substitutes brewed from peanuts, potatoes, and chicory.
We have been living on the contents of those boxes you sent to us. Nothing was spoiled except that card of biscuits. Those were molded some, but we used over half of them in a soup. Thank Mr. Burdix 1,000 times for me, also Mrs. Maxson for those pies. And those fried cakes and ginger snaps are first rate, and the dried berries, they're nice, and the dried beef and applesauce, that was first rate.
No one agent so much obstructs this army as the degrading vice of drunkenness. Total abstinence would be worth 50,000 men to the armies of the United States. General George McClellan.
If a soldier couldn't buy it, he made it. One Union recipe called for bark juice, tar water, turpentine, brown sugar, lamp oil, and alcohol. Southerners sometimes dropped in raw meat and let the mixture ferment for a month or so to add what one veteran remembered as an old and mellow taste. The men called their home brew Knock 'em Stiff, Pop Skull, and Oh Be Joyful.
I invited my comrades to assist me in emptying 3 canteens of Oh Be Joyful, then spent the balance of the evening singing. Then we parted in good spirits.
In March 1863, John Mosby's Confederate Rangers raided Fairfax Courthouse, Virginia, capturing 2 captains, 30 privates, 58 horses, and Brigadier General Edwin Stoughton. For that I am sorry, Lincoln said when told of the capture, for I can make brigadier generals, but I can't make horses. General Mosby had made life miserable for Northern commanders throughout the war. No other Confederate officer was mentioned favorably as many times in Robert E. Lee's dispatches as John Singleton Mosby.
There were no medals in the Confederate Army, not one in the whole course of the war. The Confederate reason for that given was that they were all heroes, and it would not do to single anyone out. They were not all heroes. But there was a suggestion made to Lee that there be a roll of honor for the Army of Northern Virginia, and Lee disallowed it. The highest honor you could get in the Confederate Army was to be mentioned in dispatches, and that was considered absolutely enough.
March 5th, 1863. The arm of the slaves is the best defense against the arm of the slaveholder. Who would be free themselves must strike the blow. I urge you to fly to arms and smite with death the power that would bury the government and your liberty in the same hopeless grave. This is our golden opportunity. Frederick Douglass.
The colored population is the great available and yet unavailed of force for restoring the Union. The bare sight of 50,000 armed and drilled black soldiers upon the banks of the Mississippi would end the rebellion at once. And who doubts that we can present that sight if we but take hold in earnest? Abraham Lincoln.
The people most affected by the Emancipation Proclamation obviously did not receive it as news, because they knew before Lincoln knew that the war was about emancipation. And moreover, they knew, as perhaps Lincoln did without fully realizing it, and certainly as many people today do not realize, that the Emancipation Proclamation did nothing to get them their freedom. It said that they had a right to go and put their bodies on the line if they had the nerve to believe in it. And many of them had the nerve to believe in it, and many suffered for that.
To Lincoln, it was now clear that harsher measures were needed to destroy the Confederacy. He called for more troops, and in February, pushed a conscription act through Congress. The Emancipation Proclamation had already authorized the arming of freed slaves.
As to the politics of Washington, the most striking thing is the absence of personal loyalty to the president. It does not exist. He has no admirers, no enthusiastic supporters, no one to bet on his head.
The fall elections had not gone well. Fredericksburg only made matters worse, and in Washington, talk of the disaster was everywhere. "If there is a worse place than hell," Lincoln told a visitor, "I am in it."
The single most unpopular act of Lincoln's administration was the Emancipation Proclamation. It not only was horribly unpopular in the Confederacy, where Jefferson Davis called it the most wicked thing that the dark side of humankind had ever come up with, but millions of Northerners responded to it as well. They did not really want a great many Northerners did not want the war to be changed to a war for slave liberation.
Opposition to the war was spreading, especially among Democrats in the heartland. Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Indiana, and the southern half of Lincoln's own Illinois. The proclamation ignited an anti-war movement in the North. All but 35 men of the 138th Illinois deserted over emancipation, declaring they would lie in the woods until moss grew on their backs, rather than help free the slaves. Groups with names like the Knights of the Golden Circle and Sons of Liberty met in secret and muttered of forcing an end to the war. Their enemies called them Copperheads, and they wore on their lapels the head of liberty, snipped from a copper penny. Their leader was Congressman Clement Vallandigham of Ohio. Lincoln had him thrown in jail and later banished to the Confederacy.
You have not conquered the South. You never will. War for the Union was abandoned, war for the Negro openly begun, and with stronger battalions than before. With what success? Let the dead at Fredericksburg answer.
All of these things bore in on him, plus the fact that the South had a strong army and a good leadership and was... But then he would pick up a Richmond newspaper and he'd say, here's what they're saying about Jeff Davis down here. I don't look so bad, because the South had a free press too, and he realized, that Jeff was not doing any better than he was as far as they were concerned.
Davis was walking down the street in Richmond one day, and a Confederate soldier who was in Richmond on furlough passed him and stopped him and said, "Sir, mister, bean't you Jefferson Davis?" And Davis said that he was. The soldier said, "Well, I thought so. You look so much like a Confederate postage stamp."